Over the last several years, NDTV has been bringing our viewers and our readers reports on the extent of the Chinese infrastructure build-up along the line of actual control, all the way from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh. And this became particularly significant after the Galwan clash, which left 20 Indian soldiers dead and an unknown number of Chinese soldiers dead, which really brought the two nuclear neighbors onto perhaps even a larger conflict, which thus far has been avoided. But the way NDTV has actually brought our viewers and our readers these reports is through satellite imagery, which has identified the nature of the Chinese threat along the LAC. And in its latest report, submitted to the US Congress, the US Department of Defense has identified key areas which are security concerns. All of these, through satellite imagery from Maxar, from other sources as well, have actually identified these threats first. These were reported first on NDTV through high resolution imagery, and there are clear references to each of these cases being significant security concerns along the line of actual control. And so, what I thought I would do is talk to you a little bit about what the US report, the US Defense Ministry report, actually says in its submission. And it is an annual report, that submission to the US Congress. For starters, they talk about, and let me just quote a little bit of that. They talk about illegal Chinese construction activity, for example, in Bhutan, that has a direct implication on us. They're talking about, and I quote, underground storage facilities near Doklam. Now, what exactly are underground storage facilities? Remember, a couple of years back, India and China, this was well before Galwan, had a standoff, a face-off in the high-altitude Doklam Plateau, that is Bhutanese territory illegally occupied by China. But since then, what China has done, and NDTV was able to actually bring to our viewers on the 23rd of November 2020, detailed satellite imagery showing hardened Chinese ammunition bunkers set up in that Doklam area. In fact, just a few kilometers away from the actual face-off site between Indian and Chinese soldiers. So that has a clear reference in the annual report of the US Department of Defense in its submission to the US Congress. They've also spoken about new villages in disputed areas in neighboring Bhutan. In fact, the areas that they are talking to or referring to over here are areas which lie just a short distance away, and I'm talking about 6 to 7 kilometers from that face-off site on Doklam. And these were also villages, one of them called Pangda, which were first identified by NDTV. And over the last couple of years, we've actually seen a great deal of expansion of Chinese activities along the Amuchu River Valley, which lies adjacent to the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan, and all across, or in fact, one after the other, in that narrow river valley are Chinese villages which have actually been constructed. The third area which this report speaks about is China's bridge across the Pangong Lake. So while I was talking about Doklam and Bhutan, now let's shift our attention north and let's shift our attention to the Ladakh region. What the report says is that there is the bridge in question, which is a second bridge over the Pangong Lake. In fact, it is an extension of what China started doing a couple of years back, the report of which was broadcast first on NDTV on the 18th of January 2022. What the images showed was China's construction of what seemed to be a relatively narrow bridge across a part of the Pangong Lake in Ladakh, illegally occupied by China, but within territory that they've been holding for several decades. Remember, all of Ladakh and all of Aksai Chin, as it were, is territory India insists is absolutely our own, all illegally occupied. So it is illegally occupied territory, but the bridge across the Pangong was significant. It was identified by NDTV on the 18th of January. That bridge has subsequently been expanded to have a second carriageway as well. Its presence means that China can get its soldiers in close proximity to Indian soldiers much faster than they could earlier on. A key point mentioned in that US report to their Congress is, and I quote, a dual purpose airport having been constructed near the center sector between India and China, and multiple helipads. In fact, on the 19th of December 2022, NDTV broadcast images of the Shigatse airfield. This is the dual use airfield. There are civilian aircraft over there, and there are military aircraft over there as well. In fact, the images which we posted indicated the presence of 10 flanker type aircraft. This is the aircraft which is analogous to what we operate in India, which is known as the Sukhoi 30 aircraft. The Chinese have their own variant of that. It is, of course, a Russian design, but 10 of these aircraft, along with an airborne aerial warning aircraft, parked over there at Shigatse Airport. So, again, mention of this airfield, among others, in that particular report. The report also talks about China's continuing development of military infrastructure along the line of actual control. And what we will today be bringing our viewers is imagery of an area approximately 60 kilometers directly north of Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, where China have constructed a new military garrison, a garrison which did not exist about a year back, but since then has been built up. Remember, north of Tawang, along the line of actual control, was an area where Indian and Chinese soldiers clashed several months back. Now, this particular garrison has images of armored personnel carriers and trucks as well. So, the question is this: while we have spoken about the threat that Chinese infrastructure poses for India, it is important to state for our viewers that India has countered this Chinese threat quite categorically. How have they been able to do that? Through 90 projects launched by the Border Roads Organization of approximately 3,000 crores. Of these 90 projects, 64 projects are in Arunachal Pradesh, Ladakh, and Sikkim. And by projects, what are we talking about? We're talking about tunnels, we're talking about roads, we're talking about bridges. For decades, India has not had infrastructure by way of road access to areas along the line of actual control. There was a belief that if you constructed roads, then that would actually pave the way, quite literally, for the Chinese to make incursions into Indian territory. But that philosophy has been tossed out, and there is now an active sense that we need roads along the LAC and in vulnerable areas to ensure that we get our soldiers to frontline positions. So there is a very active effort, and an extremely commendable one, done by India to actually build up along the line of actual control. So the point of this vlog is actually to establish the key points mentioned by the US Department of Defense in their annual report to the US Congress. Also mentioned that these were all instances reported first by NDTV, but also highlight the Indian counter to the Chinese infrastructure activities.